families, creating a lifetime of memories. Sadly, some families are denied these important moments due to the sad practice of alienation. These are families divided.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Families Divided TV. In this week's episode, Dr. Steve Lindenberg reviews the stages of grief and bereavement. Illustrating examples from his 46-year practice, Steve contrasts the trauma of the loss of grandparent contact and visitation of alienated grandchildren versus estranged grandchildren. In closing, Steve provides option for restoring and repairing relationships with alienated and estranged grandchildren. This is going to be a really great episode for many of us who are dealing with alienation and some estrangement from their grandchildren. So I'm sure you're going to be getting much out of this. We're going to be right back with Dr. Steve Lindenberg right after these messages.
Divorce and co-parenting are a major life interruption for families, especially the kids, but also for parents and grandparents. And it's even worse in blame-filled, high-conflict cases. When parents engage in alienation by turning the kids against the other parent or grandparents, kids suffer. They're denied the opportunity to build the 4 big skills necessary for future resilience. New Ways for Families online class can help. Parents learn to use our popular BIF and EAR skills to calm the conflict and stop the hostile emails and texts. And we even have a class for kids and parents to learn together. Research shows a 75% improvement in joint parental decision-making after this course is taken, plus overall improvements for kids' well-being. Don't wait to make this affordable investment in your children's future and improve your well-being too. Start learning new ways for your family today at conflictplaybook.com.
Hello, this is Dr. Steve speaking to you again. I'm speaking to you from Pennsylvania. It's a beautiful day here today. It's a difficult subject that I'm going to address with you today. We're going to talk about examples of grandparent alienation as well as grandparent estrangement and how they are different and how they are traumatic at the same time. So let's start by doing a review of the stages of grief and bereavement. And you can Google this. You don't need an expert to walk you through this, but I thought it's important for us to just have a brief review. You might remember that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, way back when, was the first to talk about the stages of grief and bereavement. And they've since been researched and has found that these stages are applicable to many types of loss, including the loss through alienation and estrangement. So one thing I want you to remember, hold this thought in your mind, that I've had patients in the past who have told me that they get concerned because they're not grieving according to the plan. They're not going through the phases in order. Well, the grief and bereavement process is a fluid process. So think of yourself as standing on the shore and the tide comes in and the tide goes out and the surf comes in and the surf goes out. That's pretty much how we bereave, how we grieve and bereave and recover. So hold that thought in your mind and let's just go through these stages a little bit. So one is the first stage is denial. You get the news that somebody has died, whether it was expected or unexpected. If it's unexpected, it's worse because of the shock involved in it. But when somebody has died and it's somewhat expected, it's not quite as shocking, but there still is a denial. It's difficult to believe, somebody's made a mistake. Your loved one can't possibly be gone. You refuse to discuss your loss, and some people act like everything is okay. I'm fine. I don't want to talk about it. Then you start to busy yourself with work and other things so you don't have to deal with your feelings, and you pretend that your loved one has gone on a vacation or will be back soon. And one of the telling factors of this stage is that you continue to speak. The bereaved person, continues to speak about the lost loved one in the present tense. So you're talking about them as though you just saw them a few minutes ago, as opposed to the fact that they're no longer with us. So that's the denial phase. And then after a while, when that phase starts to exhaust its energy and run its course, anger comes in. And the anger may come in, and remember, it's fluid. So the anger might come before the denial or in the denial. And all of these traits could occur at the same time, simultaneously or sequentially or out of sequence. And in the anger, you might feel very angry with yourself, because somehow you might have caused the event. And in some cases, unfortunately, there are people who are in car accidents and their child is killed, or somebody in the car is killed, and the person did cause the event. So that makes it even more complicated. But I want to keep it simple for right now, because I want to keep our focus on you, the grandparents out there. So in some cases, you might be mad at doctors for somebody dying, or the first responder for letting your loved one pass. You might feel like things are unfair and it was very tragic, and you have what we call impotent rage. And the impotent rage is a rage that you can't resolve, because there's no way to resolve the rage. There's no way to rationally be able to talk to somebody and get rid of that loss. Not right away, anyway. So then the next stage we have is bargaining. So if people say, well, if only we had gone to a different doctor, maybe our daughter would have gotten treatment in time and would still be here. Or other comments that I hear in my practice: if only we hadn't gone on vacation, Joe wouldn't have gotten his heart disease and wouldn't have died while we were in Florida. Or another one is, and we grieve our pets too, by the way. So, oh, if only I'd gotten my dog an electric collar, she wouldn't have run out into the street and gotten run over. Well, if only, we don't know that. There's no way of knowing that. That's not rational thinking. But those are the kinds of thoughts that go through your mind when you're bargaining. If only I would have gone to church more often, or if only I would have gone to synagogue the other night. Maybe if I had more faith in God, maybe this wouldn't have happened. So those are all normal thoughts, by the way. You're not ready to be institutionalized for mental health problems simply because you have those thoughts. And remember, again, I can't stress this enough, these are all fluid. So there's not a sequence. You don't do the anger first, and then you don't get the depression second, and then you don't get the bargaining third, and you don't get the anger fourth, or they don't come in a sequence. Okay, so let's talk about the next stage, which is a very difficult. When we realize that bargaining is not going to work, we can get angry and pound our head against the wall, and we can stay in shock for as long as we want to, and it's not going to bring back the relationship in the case that we're trying to talk about today, or it's not going to be bring back the dead person or the lost pet or whatever. Oftentimes depression sets in. So depression is kind of a life-saving mechanism at some level, because it shuts down your sensitivity in your body and numbs you to a degree that because your body just can't handle the levels of hormones and the stress that goes along with all the other aspects of grief and bereavement. So in the depression phase, there's a loss of hope about the future. Well, what good is my life? My daughter is gone. That's all I live for. There's a feeling of directionlessness. You get lost or confused about your life. You have difficulty concentrating, and you have difficulty making decisions. So you go back and forth, and sometimes you just don't feel like getting out of bed. In the worst cases of depression, you might feel suicidal, or you might feel like running away. And those are all normal feelings. And making sure you don't act on those is the goal of grief and bereavement support groups, and also therapists that specialize in grief and bereavement. So the last phase, or the resolution phase is what I call it, is this sadness and sense of loss. So the grief never really fades. If somebody says, well, you can have more children, you get over the loss of your baby already. That's a cruel thing for somebody to say. And oftentimes when people say things like that, they don't know what else to say. Really, they don't have an idea what to say. So they're just trying to comfort you the best that they can with the knowledge that they have. So this stage, you begin to learn to live with the loss. It's not that you forget anybody, but you begin to live with the loss, and you develop a newfound ability to accept the reality of the loss and to allow both your sorrow and the joy that you remember of your deceased partner or child or friend or pet. They can coexist. You can have both sorrow and joy. And in this stage of grief, you're no longer immobilized by your sadness, but you might be motivated by it. You might be motivated to go out and volunteer and help other people. And when you hear a song on the radio that reminds you of your loved one, you don't burst into tears anymore, but you smile, and it moves you to a special place of recollection. So, so those are the stages of grief and bereavement. And so there's no timeline for grief. If somebody tells you to move on or get over it, that's their problem. That's not your problem. You don't have to listen to that. Some people just underestimate or misunderstand is what I'm trying to tell you, the weight of the loss. They just don't, no one can experience your feelings. You're the only one that can experience your feelings. So you have to be careful because an uncomplicated grief is sometimes referred to as normal grief. It has a cycle of about 14 months. And it usually runs 14 months to 2 years, and the worst part of grief is the second year. It's not actually the first year, because the first year people are checking in on you, you have a lot of attention. The second year when you celebrate the birthday of your deceased loved one, the reality hits you that there are no more birthdays, that your loved one is gone. And so the second year is really more difficult. And that's why we say 14 months is a good, 14 months to 2 years is a good range for recovering from the death of a loved one. And there are a lot of support groups. You can find them. All you have to do is call a hospice anywhere near you. And often they will have support groups for for bereaved parents, rather, or bereaved individuals. And you don't have to have used the hospice. It's a volunteer group, and they open it up to the general community. Complicated grief is a whole other presentation. And it's a very profound, intense grief. It's pathological. It can become debilitating, and it needs professional attention, usually with some kind of medication and counseling. And the medication is usually provided by a psychiatrist or a family physician or an internist, and mental health is provided by a mental health counselor. So hold those thoughts in mind now, and let's talk about the main subject today. And let's give you some examples. Let me give you some examples of grief due to the loss of grandchildren through estrangement and alienation. So the first types of grief I'm going to talk about are the grief that's associated with the alienation from a grandchild. In other words, alienation is something that is intentional, that somebody actually is doing something to target your child or you. There's an intentionality to cause harm by withholding the children from you or turning the children against you. So hold on to that thought. That's alienation. That's a form of child abuse. And the research shows that parent alienation, I would guess grandparent alienation to a lesser degree, but that type of alienation causes more trauma than if a child is physically or sexually abused by another parent. So think about that. And you don't have to take my word for it. Just Google it, look it up, and you'll see there's a lot of research on this subject. So let's now go to a first type of an example. In this example, well, in both examples of alienation, you enjoyed a loving, caring, and frequent interaction with your grandchild. They often visited you. You often babysat for them. You changed their diapers. Sometimes you bathed them. As they aged up, they would stay overnight. As they aged up even more, you might have taken them to Disney World. You might have taken them to the shore. You feed them. You cook for them. You buy clothes for them to go back to school. all those kinds of things. Oh, I forgot the most important thing, grandparents, and I'm one of you. You spoil the heck out of them because that's what we're ordained to do by our role as grandparents, right? And then you give them back to their parents. I know that's an old joke, but I just threw that in there because some of this information that I'm sharing with you is just so serious. But think about that. You have that framework in your mind. So everything is going along well, and suddenly your child divorces his or her partner. There's a divorce, and it's an ugly divorce. They don't just sit around the table and say, well, let's let the children decide where they want to live, and they can come back and forth and they can see grandma and grandpa. No, it's an ugly divorce. And the parent who initiates the divorce decides that your child is a bad person and needs to be punished, and the court's not going to do that. So they decide to withhold the child, your grandchild, from your child. So that is one of the ways to punish your child, and to make him regret ever divorcing the spouse, your former daughter or son-in-law. And your child keeps you then from seeing your grandchild. So that complicates it even more, because now all of your contact with your grandchildren has suddenly cut off, just like somebody chops off a finger or something of that nature. I don't mean to be cavalier about it, but it's sort of a good metaphor, because it feels like you've lost a piece of yourself, doesn't it? I mean, if you've been through that, you feel like you've lost something. You've lost a piece of yourself. So now, in addition to your child being the targeted parent, you are also the target of alienation, because in addition to punishing your child by taking the children, he punishes your child by taking the children from their beloved grandparents who have done such a great job in helping to raise the children. And, this could be, sometime when they're 8 or 9 years old, you've taken them to baseball practice, you've taken them to football practice, you've taken them to dance lessons, trying to help out your children, and their families. So your relationship now with your grandchild or children is disrupted, and it's corrupted, and it's ended. And you may actually never see your grandchildren again until they're over the age of 18, which is the age of consent, when they can make their own decisions. And that is just like somebody, if you've been through it, and I've talked to some of you out there before, it feels like something died, something inside of you died, and you become very bereaved, and you look for help, and there's not a whole lot of options for you. I mean, some states have grandparent rights, and in those cases you can petition the court, but it costs a lot of money. If you don't have a lot of money and resources, it's very difficult, and oftentimes it's very difficult to prevail because you're not the primary guardian or parent. There are cases where you have been the primary guardian or parent, and in those states that allow grandparenting rights, you probably have better standing. But I'm not an attorney, so you might want to check that out with an attorney. The next example of grandparents and alienation from the grandchild is a little different. It starts out the same way, that you're the loving, caring, spoiling, caring grandparent that has just devoted your grandparenting years to your grandchildren. And after the divorce, your child remarries. So this is a little different. Your child has initiated the divorce, and she remarries or he remarries. Well, guess what? In these cases, the new spouse turns out to be a controlling, insecure, hostile, easily threatened, vigilant, mentally ill, and immature person. So this person kind of snookered your child into a relationship, and we can't control who our children pick, even though we'd like to. It's their choice, and we only can hope for the best and support them the best we can. But in this case, the new spouse demands that your grandchildren no longer see you, because they'll make up stuff about you, that you say bad things to that children about the new spouse, or you don't like them, or they don't like what you feed the children. They want the children to be vegetarian, and you want to buy them a hot dog at the baseball game. And the thing about this is that the allegations don't even have to be true. They can be totally fabricated. They just make stuff up. because people with personality disorders will do that. And very often you're talking about people who have narcissistic type traits or personalities, or what we call borderline traits or personalities. And I'll let you look that up because I'm not going to go into that. It'd take us too long to go through that. So what's different is this in this example is that your child supports the new spouse or partner over you. So that's a double loss. Not only have you lost your grandchildren, but you've now lost your child to this controlling spouse, to the point where your own child says things to you that are not true. Your own child becomes brainwashed, and they develop false memories, and they attack you, and they and you don't even recognize this child anymore. Is this the child we raised? Is this the child we gave birth to? And those are the kinds of questions that you ask yourself, and it's just not a good thing. And maybe complicating this even further, let's say the new spouse has children from other relationships. I've had cases like that where the new spouse will have children from 2 or 3 other relationships, now trying to form a blended relationship with your son or daughter who has rescued that person and tries to create family for that person and creates a family that leaves you out. And so then what happens is, if your grandchild is like an infant or a toddler, they're not allowed to visit you anymore because the new spouse doesn't like you and thinks that you're going to do something horrible. And the bottom line is that they really fear you as a threat to the marriage, that you're going to persuade your child and say, what are you doing in this marriage? This woman is crazy, or this man is so controlling. And never do that. Even if you feel like you want to do that, trust me when I tell you, never do that. You will push your children away and lose them for good. And this is a very painful type of alienation, because you could run into your grandchildren at the supermarket or at church or wherever, and the children won't talk to you, and then they'll go back and cuddle with, of all people, their new mother or father, not your son or daughter, but the new parent. And the new parent will turn up her nose at you, or his nose at you, and they'll just ignore you, won't even greet you, and walk away. And then the children, you start getting letters, don't send me any more cards, don't try to contact me anymore, I don't want to see you anymore. And and then if your child tries to persuade the new partner that they should let your grandchildren have contact with you, then the new spouse will pull out something to the effect that, look, you either choose them or me. It's not a choice. And at the risk of losing custody of his children to this new partner, or having to share it, the new partner tries to preserve the marriage. So this type of alienation, as with most of them, it just defies logic or common sense, because there's mental illness involved in the new spouse, in the new partner. And you can wind up with what we call paranoid projections of this new spouse, that spouse becomes threatened and very vigilant and accuses you of trying to turn your child against them. And again, it's like someone has died, and you become bereaved. So I have about 10 minutes left of my presentation today. I wish I had an hour, but let me talk to you about the difference between estrangement from a grandchild and alienation from a grandchild. So here's an example of estrangement. Heaven forbid your child dies, but it happens. So your child dies. After a period of time, you're still close to your daughter or son-in-law and the grandchildren. And after a year or two, your in-law decides that he or she wants to remarry. So you're all happy for them, and you understand that life goes on. And the focus of the surviving parent now becomes the new nuclear family. So in these cases, there's no malice from your child's former spouse or from the new marital partner. They like you. They for a while, they'll encourage the grandchildren to go and visit with you. But as a practical matter, the grandchildren become more distant because their focus is now on the future and not on the past. And you're part of the past. So that includes the loss of a parent and the pain and the trauma that goes along with that loss. So whenever they look at you, they remember their birth parent, and that causes the trauma to flame up. And let's say the in-law, then your former daughter-in-law or son-in-law has a child in the new relationship, and your grandchildren are now pulled more toward that infant than they are with you, and the grandchildren just want to move on. So and the grandchildren also have new grandparents. Not only do they have the widow or widower's grandparents, and you had a good relationship with them before, they were your in-laws, so to speak, but the partner has parents, and they are new grandparents, and they are novel. So this estrangement isn't a deliberate malicious act. It's sort of an act of God, if you want to call it that. It's an act of nature. It just happens. But the result is that you experience loss and grief. And the loss and grief can be just as profound as if the children were alienated from you. Although it's usually not the case. Usually there's more understanding of the nature of things and how these develop, but it still is a very painful loss. For any of you who've gone through that, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. The second, and I just want to tell you, I'm not covering every example in the universe of these kinds of alienation examples and estrangement examples. I just picked two that I have experience with that are fairly common. So let me talk to you about a second estrangement scenario where the grandchildren are estranged from you as opposed to alienated from you. Okay, so your child gets a divorce, and your child remarries. But and so there's no breakage of your relationship with your grandchildren. It's fine. You welcome the new spouse into the family. He or she loves you. They feel a member of the family. Everything's going along pretty well for a while. Yes, your grandchildren have to go and visit with the non-custodial, or with their, I don't want to say non-custodial, but with the other party, the other parent, and they share holidays and they share vacations. And so you develop a routine where every other year you have them Thanksgiving Day, and then the next year they spend Thanksgiving Day with the other partner, like their mother or their father, who's now divorced from your child. And Christmases and Easter and summers are like that as well. But what complicates this case is that the parent that your child remarries has a job opportunity across the country that pays $500,000 a year, $250,000 a year. It's just a no-brainer. They're going to pay the moving costs. They're going to do everything they can to recruit your child's new spouse. And so they move across the country. Sometimes they move to a foreign country. They might move to Australia. That's pretty far away. But oftentimes they might move to Europe or Canada or someplace like that and move outside of the United States. So the distance now becomes a barrier to your relationship with your grandchildren. And as time passes, instead of seeing them a couple of times a month or every 3 months and every other holiday and spending summer vacations with them, you don't see them as much. You have a great relationship with the new spouse, and he or she wants you involved in the children's lives, but the distances are just prohibitive. And in that result, you have less frequent, if any, contact with your grandchildren during their growing up years. And that's what complicates the grief, because our children developmentally change so much from infancy to adulthood in a short period of time, 18 years. And any piece of that you miss as a grandparent you're never going to get that back. And it's at a time in your life when you hope to be able to correct some of the mistakes you made with your children by being a better grandparent. So those are the two scenarios I have. And I want to close out with some suggestions. And you're by now you're saying, "Oh my goodness, what can I do about this?" It seems like such a hopeless situation. Whether it's alienation or estrangement, it's going to result in loss and grief and bereavement. Well, in the case of alienation and estrangement, particularly alienation, check with a family law attorney, because some states have established grandparent rights in custody procedures. Pennsylvania, where I'm talking to you from, is one of those states, but not every state has that opportunity. Also, a skilled family law attorney may be able to make a connection with the alienating or estranged parents to negotiate a better visitation schedule without taking the matter to court, which is cost effective and also less toxic to the relationship. You might want to seek reunification counseling or therapy from a reputable and experienced parent alienation or reunification expert. And that expert may be able to have resources to reach out to the alienated or estranged parents, the parents of the estranged children, to see if they would be willing to enter into counseling with you to try to see what you could do to recover that relationship, or at least maximize the amount of time you can have with your grandchildren. You might want to find a good support group. Family Access Fighting for Children's Rights is an excellent resource for connecting with others similarly affected by grandparent alienation or estrangement. And fifth and last, there may be no solution for reunification that wouldn't do more harm than good. And those are tragic situations. In that case, seek out an expert in grief and bereavement counseling. Come to grips with the reality that not all of our efforts have happy endings. I mean, it's nice when we have a happy ending in our life, but sometimes life is difficult. And so I know what I'm telling you to do in terms of resolving your grief and coming to grips with the reality. It's easier said than done, but your health will pay the price if you're unable to let go and move on. And just like any other chronic stress, it aggravates your hormones, it causes inflammation of your blood vessels and other parts of your body. And it is true that people die from broken hearts. So, if you're not here on the planet anymore, you're really not available to your grandchildren when they become young adults and mature. And that's the time to repair the relationship. So keep a list of your efforts, keep a log of your efforts. Send cards. If the cards are returned, save them. There may come a time later in life for recovery. So that's my presentation for today. I hope it was informative to you. If you're going through alienation or estrangement, you have my sympathy and my empathy. And I hope that learning from this a little bit will ease your pain.
On our next episode of Families Divided TV, retired Israeli judge Philip Marcus discusses encouraging judges and other professionals to get training for speedy and competent handling of child contact problems.